this is update for April 21, 2025, day 1153 of the war and of the date update. Also catch up since last video, which was on April 14th. So I'm going to do economic overview and mostly focusing on tariffs and what's going on around that situation. And then I'm going to switch to the situation on the battlefield in Ukraine. So as I mentioned, I'm going to start with discussion of tariffs. And first, I just want to kind of share high-level schematics of what is happening in the U.S. Capital markets. And so for those who are not familiar, essentially capital markets are split into key pieces. Well, there are more, but we're going to look at the sort of the most sort of known and the parts that affect pretty much everyone. So first one is equity market, and we focused on the US because tariffs are essentially it's essentially unilateral effort by the US to separate itself from the rest of the world, because the rest of the world there's no domino effect of other countries tariffing each other and so on. And that's really the essentially answer to this attempt to tariff the rest of the world, that it's going to fail, because if other countries are not following the suit, and they so far, not to my knowledge, anyone is following it. So essentially the sort of normal low tariff conditions remain between the rest of the world, and this is just US, so US kind of becoming isolated island, and so the rest will just trade around that island. And while it's going to definitely hurt everyone, there's no question that somehow the rest of the world will be immune. There will be significant negative economic impact on the rest of the world, but at the same time, the rest of the world will survive. The same is going to be significant negative impact on the US, and obviously US can survive. It just the point is just unnecessary pain for everyone that doesn't really solve any problems. But let's just sort of look again, going back to this markets, just simple mechanics of what's happening. So there is US equity market, then there is US debt market. This includes US governmental borrowings, and also private market borrowings. In addition, there is gold, which I mentioned many times is actually true money. So what's happening as a result of these tariffs is that foreigners, and I just marked foreigners with blue arrows, and US investors are with this kind of like dark orange arrows. So what's happening is so far it looks like that the most outflows that were triggered by these tariffs are coming out of the US equity market. And there are several major sort of pathways for those. So part of it is both foreigners, and I would say more foreigners than US investors. They are investing in gold. So you see gold basically rising like probably never before, or not never before, but not in the recent history of past, let's say 30, 20 years for sure. And US markets are down significantly. I think if you look at the, let's say Nasdaq, it's definitely in a bear market because it's down from its top in February about 20, I think 25 or 28%, and similar situation with others. So part of it is again going into gold. That's why I see this dynamic. The rest, actually some of it, and majority foreign investors, they just simply pulling money out of the US, and then also going back into gold or their own equity or debt markets. So just simply capital is just simply being pulled out of the US. And similar situation is going with, let's say, minority of the US investors. And then some part of the US investors, they just simply exiting equity market as kind of like wait out and moving into that US debt market and mostly into US governmental borrowings, which is called treasuries in US, probably short-term treasuries, and also some probably long-term. And so they just kind of want to wait out decline in equity market because they understand it's going to be negatively impacted. And so they move into that market. At the same time, there are some foreign investors who are pulling out of the US debt market. And that's why you see this dynamic where US debt market, the interest rates or yields, they somewhat rising, and I'm mostly referring to US governmental borrowings, but they are not spiking as they could have been. So they sort of a little bit going sort of up, but it's not, because there is somewhat balancing. These US investors, they are replacing to large extent these foreign investors who are leaving, but at the same time it's not enough, so the yields are rising, but sort of relatively manageable way. So this is what's been going on since that start of these tariffs. In terms of what kind of capital it is, it's mostly just short-term speculative capital. So what's exiting U.S. equity market? It's both for the U.S. and foreign. It's short-term focused speculative capital. So this is not the main outflow. And so what we've seen so far is just preview of what could be happening. So this is not long-term capital, relatively low return expectation capital. That capital hasn't moved out of U.S. equity market, and definitely hasn't moved out in mass from the U.S. Debt market, because if that capital starts to move, the situation will get dramatically, I would say, catastrophically bad for the U.S. and for the rest of the world as well. And this is kind of like where I think the situation is on the edge, and the whole point is, I think, right now is to prevent this transitioning from just the speculative capital exiting to actually the long-term lower return focused capital exiting. That would be the catastrophic situation. And so what I'm trying to say is what we've seen in terms of declines in both equity and debt US markets is actually very I would say small effect, and much more worse things can come. And the same goes true for gold, where it can be really reach easily $5, I don't know, $6, $7, $8, $10,000 per ounce. So this is assuming this tariff war continues. Again, can change overnight. Everything, we'll see what happens, but this is just assuming things go the way they are going right now. And just to confirm that this U.S. debt market is still holding on, I'm looking at the spread for U.S. high-yield corporate bonds. So high yield means low-quality corporations that are basically marginal. And from investor perspective, they are low quality. So you don't see spike in spread on those. Basically, the spread is sort of margin or add-on to U.S. governmental borrowings, how much you need to pay extra over U.S. government to borrow from investors. And as you can see, there's not really a panic yet here, and things relatively contained. So again, going back to what I was saying, that U.S. debt market is still holding on for now. The question is when these tariffs will start affecting real economy, where it's going to be felt by the average person on the street. And I think, given that the ships from China, they take about 3 weeks, maybe a little bit more, to arrive to the U.S. I think it started on April 10th, so give it another 5 days. So in about a month. So I think around starting after May 15th, we may see some initial shocks to actually supply chain system and to production in the U.S. There are some initial shocks already, but that's more preemptive decisions versus the decisions that will be happening due to the collapse of the supply chains are going to be more forced decisions. So in other words, what's being done right now, and it's very sportily, it's more to prevent losses. Simply, just you just stop producing because you understand you cannot sell at the profit. So that's not a forced decision; it's actually a discretionary decision from that perspective. Obviously, it's all forced by the tariff situation. There's no question about that. And so the time when the forced decisions will start to hit is that when you don't have parts or components because they're too expensive, and you have to stop production. And this I'm referring to the U.S. obviously, because the rest of the world will not experience this issue. This is going to be a unique U.S. issue. It's again assuming the tariffs will continue. So that will probably start hitting sometime after May 15th, and that's going to be sort of a snowballing effect. It's not going to just sharply immediately hit. It will be probably very slow, and probably another month when it's going to get really probably bad. So and this is the sort of kind of like potential future for developments in the US. This is all very tightly connected to political situation in the US, because this whole apparently, and this is my attempt to understand the logic why to do these tariffs, because they seem to be so counterproductive from just purely logical economical perspective. And it seems that it's really driven by the political situation where U.S. president made a lot of promises, specifically on tax breaks for what he thinks is middle class or people or on a lower income, such as retirees, because he obviously wants to boost his voting base, basically his support, political support from these groups, and so he wants sort of pay back by reducing taxes, which then obviously reduces tax collections, as you can imagine, and that's really individual income taxes. So this is the main source of revenue for the U.S. government. Because as you can see, social insurance and retirement, it's sort of like tied up to support for social security. So in a way, you cannot really, it's kind of like a pass-through situation. In some ways, you don't really have it because it kind of goes out of the pocket to pay retirees and other purposes. And then corporations, they don't produce many taxes, and as you can see, customs duties, which is the tariffs, they are minuscule. So essentially, what is happening? You kind of I would say, overpromised to your voting base that you're going to reduce taxes, and if you do that, that obviously significantly reduces this stream here, and it could be, I don't know, different estimates could be 200-300. So you're gonna go under 1 trillion on this, and this is 6 months. This is through March, so this is meaning the March included, cumulative since October 1 through March 31st, these numbers here. So you destroy this essentially or undermine. And then to compensate it, the idea is, okay, we're just going to get this tariffs and this will go up significantly. This will offset and everything's going to be wonderful. So people will pay less taxes and they will not really sort of realize that they really pay these taxes because the custom duties are up. So essentially, this is kind of like the logic apparently. And it doesn't work because this customs duties simply it's just nobody's gonna pay that basically, and so it's and then you need to pass this law that allows to reduce income taxes, and again you cannot do it, so you cannot deliver on the promises to your water base, and so you're disappointing that and you're setting up yourself for losing next election cycle. So that's why such a pressure to do these tariffs in the hope that that will save this whole situation. And at the same time, you have another problem where, as you can see, the expenses significantly larger than revenues. So it's 1.3 trillion for 6 months. So if we just simply extrapolate to 12 months, it's going to be 2.6 trillion. So it's larger than 2024 and 2023. So again, things getting even more, call it out of control. So, and again, there was a promise to reduce, this government spending, debt, and so on. And so that's so you kind of caught between a rock and a hard place. The other part is that I circle with this pink color is stuff that really drives this this deficit essentially. And so you need to significant cuts to net interest. You really, and that's why you hear this push by U.S. president that he wants to U.S. central bank to decrease interest rates, hoping that this will help with this, which it will not. But there is that hope again. So this is very unlikely because this will really spike inflation significantly, and simply U.S. central bank is not willing to do that because they will be held responsible for that ultimately, because U.S. president may push them, but he's not going to be responsible for that. They will be held responsible. So the only way to do that is just to install a new head of U.S. central bank who's going to be essentially very compliant and willing to do whatever president asks. And I don't think it's going to be easy. And that will create issues with interest rates in the U.S. even more. So again, this is essentially dead end, this pass. Then there is a health and Medicare. It's essentially the same thing. It's just Medicare is essentially health expenses for low income part of the population, but together that's the same thing. It's health expenses. So as you can see, this is really huge number, pushing close to $1 trillion just for 6 months. So roughly it's a $2 trillion for the year, and that's really one of the biggest driver of this deficit. The problem was this: if there are cuts to any of this, then this water base that actually utilizing this resources, this healthcare resources, they will be extremely upset, and especially given that some of those people have medical conditions where if you don't get whatever you need to get, that that this is severely there could be severe results, even deaths. So this is a problem because it is a solution. It's a key to solving this deficit problem. But the problem with this requires change in health situation. Basically, reducing sick population, and this really requires reform of the whole sort of medical healthcare system in the US, which is going to be very difficult, and it will take, if you start doing it right now, probably first results going to be like in 10 years or 15 years. So this is long term, requires long term focus, and because of the political situations and this like 4-year or 2-year cycle, um, the politicians, they cannot focus on solving this. So basically, this grows and continues to grow. This problem continues to grow, and so also kind of cannot touch that end. Then national defense, potentially possible again, but still you're not gonna solve. Even if you cut it into half, you still this is not enough. And essential income security, this is examples of that would be unemployment, and also this food stamps. So basically money for food for lower income people. So this is also non-starter. So essentially, as I can show you, there's no quick solution to any of this. And so there's this desperate sort of thinking that like somehow tariffs will magically solve this, I would say, unsolvable in the short term equation. And so this is really the drive behind of this whole situation, essentially. Um, and so what's going to happen is most likely just essentially U.S. Administration, the presidential administration. They don't have any good solutions to this, and so they in a way they also hostages. They forced to continue pushing on these tariffs, and so they will persist most likely. Which, as I mentioned, then if they will persist, what most likely what is going to happen is some kind of economic crisis, meaning that there is shortages of things, which will lead to then immediate political crisis, and essentially the power to do tariffs will be probably taken from the U.S. president and back to U.S. Parliament, and that's the most likely scenario. Could change because again it's very fluid, but I think there is no willingness in the U.S. Parliament to act until there is economic crisis that will justify the actions. So it seems that the crash has to happen to basically justify, changing in this course with respect to tariffs. Now, just want to touch base a little bit on the situation, some more sort of geostrategic, geomilitary situation. The first one is actually Russian in Iran. So Russian president signed this strategic partnership agreement with Iran. What this means is that they mutually not gonna help any countries that attacks one of these two countries. So if Iran is being attacked by, let's say, US or Israel, Russia is not gonna help in any shape or form. And the other important part is that is so-called military technological cooperation will continue. What this really means is this: the between two countries there will be transfer of technologies, sale of technologies, sale of military equipment, between the two. And I think that's the most important part. This agreement is somewhat weaker relative to what being signed with North Korea, because in case of North Korea, their agreement is that it's actually both sides will sort of send troops to help defend each other. So that's definitely much different approach, as you can imagine. But still, it's pretty clear sign that Russia is not considering sort of pivoting from its alliance with North Korea, China, and Iran, and broader all of the countries that are aligned around this alliance, this core alliance. So this is again another hope in the U.S. Foreign politics that somehow it's possible to pull Russia out of this alliance with China, Iran, and North Korea, and it doesn't seem that this is actually successful, or it's really happening. And then another sort of reason, how to say, proof for that is Russia continuing its attacks or its pressure and continuing its invasion of Ukraine. There is no indication that it will stop. For example, Russian president stated that we're gonna win. Basically, the maybe not the perfect translation, but the essence is we're gonna win, meaning in war with Ukraine. So, and winning means it's very clearly stated that the minimum taking these 5 regions from Ukraine. So that's what the immediate sort of win, and the long-term win is obviously taking over entire of Ukraine. The other part is that China managed to gain sort of support from countries that are around it in its tariff in a tariff war with the U.S. So first of all, Vietnam essentially supporting China at this point. The same is with Malaysia, which is also important. They are supporting. Then you have Thailand, Cambodia, Myanmar. All of this is essentially, or call it like silent Chinese allies. So the only 2 countries that are, well, in the southern part that are sort of on the opposite side with China, and the most one is Philippines. But there's also problems, long-standing problems between Indonesia and China. And China attempts to repair that situation. Whether they're going to be able to do it or not, it's another question. But this is sort of a big question mark here. And essentially, this is the only, I would say, barrier between China and Australia. So if China manages to gain support or convince Indonesia to become at the minimum neutral and maybe positive, or maybe allied with China, then there's really no barrier between China and Australia. So in other words, China managed to fortify its position in this, so call it South Asia, in around, with its neighbors. The other part is this attacks on Yemen and Iran. Probably everyone heard that. Seems like this attack on Iran has been pulled off, cancelled, or at least temporarily. I don't believe that the plans are completely off, because U.S. Air Force and Navy, they continuing attacks on West Yemen, which is essentially extension of Iranian regime, essentially. So, but the problem is that without actually troops on the ground, you cannot do much with just simply rocket attacks or bomb attacks. It's just not gonna sort of solve the situation. There's another indication of sort of China gaining more influence. This time they had exercises with Egypt. Egypt has significant army. At least I'm not going to say it's high quality, but there is like the quantity of troops and quantity of equipment is significant, and it's relatively new, relatively decent equipment. So that's again another sort of looming problem there. Now let's switch to the situation on the battlefield in Ukraine. I would say that I will just repeat what I said before. Neither side, for different reasons, wants to or can stop this war. So Russia uh, doesn't want to stop because they're seeing that the situation is developing in their favor, and it just requires a little bit more push. And Ukrainian sort of society, Ukrainian army, Ukrainian political system is about to fall apart and crack. And so obviously there is this expectation. So there is no. It seemed that from Russian perspective, it looks like the victory just right there. You just need to grab it. From Ukrainian perspective, Ukraine simply cannot afford to stop defending itself. It's, I think, self-obvious, because Ukraine is not going to be a viable country without this regions, and viable from human perspective to be able to defend itself against new Russia's invasion. So let's say there is a peace. If Ukraine is not what it used to be, it simply will not be able to resist in significant way to renewed Russian attack. And actually, Ukraine integrity is the best deterrence for renewed Russian attack, because it will be very clear that all of these resources were wasted for nothing, and nothing, and the goal was not achieved. So again, there will be, on the Russian side, there will be the leadership will think 100 times before making another such a decision. So this is kind of like, in some ways, unresolvable situation that's really resolvable through, unfortunately, military conflict. Now I'm gonna walk through in a clockwise fashion, starting from the north, and we're just gonna jump to this Sumy / Kursk region of Russia. So at this point, Russian troops not advancing, don't continue advancing into Ukrainian territory. They control this area that I'm showing around Bassivka, and there's another village here closer to Russian border. And Ukrainian forces essentially lost all of what they had on the Russian side. So really, at this point, there's sort of small incursion of Russian troops in this Sumy region, but doesn't seem there is desire to continue this incursion, simply because Russian troops Russian command doesn't have enough troops to make any significant move. So it's very clear, if Russian command wants to do something, they can continue moving. They probably will move another into Ukraine. They can move 10-20 kilometers into Ukrainian territory, and then they're just gonna bog down. The same what happened to Ukrainian side, and it's essentially will be wasting resources that they don't have much of at this moment, and not achieving anything. So just going to be slow, death by thousand cuts, which is exactly what was going on at the beginning of Russian invasion in early 2022. And I think Russian side learned from those mistakes. So for now, it's unclear, and I would say most likely this the key component or spearhead of these troops will be transferred south to the Donetsk region in attempt to attack the Slavyansk and Kramatorsk, that whole sort of, let's say, urban area. I'll discuss it once we get there. Now let's move south to north and northeast of Kharkiv. Things here also on pause, not much is going on. And next one is north Lugansk front line. So things here more or less stable, with the exception of one area where Russian troops managed to breach Ukrainian defenses, and so far, slowly but surely, they're advancing in this sort of straight west, a little bit northwest, and a little bit of southwestern direction. Where I'm showing this, they kind of created this bulge. We'll see if I'm sure Ukrainian command will try to sort of plug this hole. It's just the question how much more damage is going to happen before this this hole is being plugged. So far, it's not, and Russian troops managing to slowly but surely advancing in all directions from this area. And the importance of this is actually this is will help to attack that Slavyansk Kramatorsk area, and I'll show it in. But the first objective is going to be obviously Lyman, this town here. Now let's move south to actually this where there is this Kramatorsk Slavyansk area to the North Donbass front line. So the goal is this towns of Slavyansk and Kramatorsk. And so the sort of one way is to attack from the sort of northeast. The other one is sort of attack from this southeast towards these areas. And so this is where looks like going to be major focus, but not straight actually from this north Lugansk, North Donbass front line, and including the southern portion of it, where the situation are relatively quiet. The main sort of push is coming actually from this Toretsk area. This is where Russian troops are attempting to bridge Ukrainian front line in a major way. So far, Ukrainian front line, defensive line, still holds, probably largely because it's there is Azov, I would say at this point it's probably better call it division, because the size is like roughly 12,000 people, so it's more of a division than even brigade. And so that's really what's third one, which is part of Ukrainian army, because there is another one which is 12, which is actually a region one, which is part of Ukrainian National Guard. So so the third one, it's basically main defensive line here, and that really creates problems for Russian advance from in this whole attack on Slavyansk Kramatorsk area. But I think that's going to be the main focus going forward for Russian troops in Ukraine, and also trying to capture Pokrovsk, but that is really difficult problem right now for Russia. Now let's move south to actually central Donbass, where there is this Pokrovsk. So situation clearly stabilized by Ukrainian commander General Dripati around Pokrovsk, which he is responsible for this area sort of immediately around Pokrovsk. He managed to stabilize, as I said, and that's creating problems for Russian command, because this really forces them. The only way to overcome this at this point is to have more resources, and the problem is that really means some kind of new round of mobilization in Russia, because all of this people who were willing to fight just for the money, that they are sort of that resources clearly drying up for Russia. There are even reports on Russian TV where this drafting or recruiting military units, they're starting to also behave the same way that's being done in Ukraine, where they're catching people and forcibly basically drafting and so on. So there are instances of that. They are very few so far in Russia, but there's a very clear trend that they probably going to be much more. So Russia is basically going in direction of Ukraine, where there is a significant number of situations where there is a forced drafting, as you probably seen it, those videos yourself. So far, the fighting continues, and these villages they change hands. So I'm not really updating the front line. The key though, that Udachny and Kotlin are firmly in Ukrainian hands. And the villages that changing hands back and forth are Pishane, Shevchenko, Lysivka. All of this area essentially it's attack, counter attack, and so on. And there's similar situation here around Novomykhailivka. But the key takeaway from this is that Russian troops are contained in this area. If we go a little bit south, the sort of the only area of relative Russian success is they gaining ground east of Kotlyarivka, so they are actually already on outskirts of Kotlyarivka. So essentially, this where these areas are, this is at this point controlled by Russian troops. So this sort of peninsula is growing inside, and obviously creating potentially down the road can create problems. So things here has not been stabilized, let's put this way. And then Russian pressure all the way south here is just significantly reduced. And again, this goes back that Russia does not have enough resources to attack everywhere, and it has to be really selective. So the situation here seems to be on pause, at least for now. Now let's move to Zaporizhya front line. Things here, the front line does not change, let's put it this way. There are here and there relatively large-scale Russian attacks, but they are not leading to any success, and they don't seem to be part of sort of concentrated and focused effort. It's just more sort of sporadic decision by local commanders in this area. Now let's move to the last section of the front line, which is along the Dnipro River. Things again more or less the same, no major changes. Some probing Russian attempts to establish bridgeheads on the western side of Dnipro River without any success. That's all for today. Till next time. Bye bye.